Hello, welcome everybody to our first podcast.
The first one,
First
bro.
podcast.
Come on.
My name is Sammy, and I'm here with my pastor and the lead pastor of One Church, David.
Come on.
How you doing, bro?
Oh, I'm excited. I'm ready. I'm happy.
Yes. So we wanna welcome you at home. For those of you tuning in to our first ever podcast, our Planters Collective podcast. In this leadership talk, we're gonna be breaking down and dissecting just everything that we're going through as a church plant, and we hope that this is of help to those who are going through the same things, right?
Well, even in our initial months of just having launched, so many questions.
Right.
You know, all of these people being interested in how we're doing what we're doing. So I said, right now that it's fresh in our minds, let's just start getting it out there.
Come on.
Because it'll be a year from now that other church planters are going to be planting, and I'll be like, look, this was really fresh. Go listen to this, go listen to that. And maybe even today, it'll help somebody.
Definitely. So I have a couple questions for you.
Let's go. Let's dive in.
Let's dive in. And just right off the bat, I want to ask you, or just tell us the story of the vision of One Church.
Yeah.
Was this something that you dreamt of when you were a kid?
Yeah.
Did it come in your teenage years? Or is this something that God just gave you out of the blue?
Yeah, I think this is crucial in the church planting just world, universe, which is the calling.
Yeah.
You know, how does it begin? How does a church plant begin? I know a lot of friends, I have a lot of pastor friends that when they were 8 years old, they were already dreaming of their churches and being pastors and instead of playing like a pretend house or something, they were playing like pretend church,
Preaching,
you know, like preaching and everything. Yeah. So I wasn't that person. My parents are pastors, and I grew up almost knowing that I know that I don't want to be a pastor.
Wow.
Like, I just don't want that life. I wanted to do something different, have my own profession, start a business, but nothing to do with being a pastor.
Right.
So I had to go through a lot of ups and downs. I was never against God. I was never against church per se, but I wasn't really committed. I wasn't really living the Christian life.
Right.
And it wasn't until maybe 7 years ago when I consider, myself going through the lowest of the low I was already married, but my marriage was in a really rough place. My finances were in a really rough place. I was just not doing well.
Wow.
I needed to be saved. I needed to be rescued. And in that point, I just remembered, I know about this God. I know about this Jesus. Let me actually try him out.
Right, yes.
And so I did. I recommitted my life to Jesus. And at that point, instantly, I felt a peace overwhelming. I still had to go through a long process of restoration and just getting all the yuckiness out.
That's important.
But I knew at that point that there were not going to be any more no's from me to God.
Wow.
So whatever God wanted of me, it was going to be a flat out yes, and immediately.
Yes.
And I started getting my marriage in order first, my life in order, my finances. Actually, I had a great job. I was doing well. And then I started feeling the nudge of the Lord calling me. It was in a conference where I really felt that call, like heavy on my life. That God said, okay, I just took you from 0 to 100, but now I need you to give me all of what you are. And I said yes. And at that moment, I started serving under my parents. And then after that, the doors opened for me to start working and serving at Skyline Church. Yeah. And then while I was at Skyline in January of 2019, during a 21 days of prayer and fasting, I just felt released from Skyline and called into this new church planting mode, which for me was very intense.
Right.
But I felt ready now because my confidence and my connection with God had never been stronger, had never been purer. And it was, I knew God was going to back it up. So for me, it was like, let's go. So even though this church planting calling on my life is fairly recent,
right,
which is a year ago, it's very strong. It's very clear in my heart. Wow. So my advice for anybody is that it doesn't matter if you've been dreaming of church planting since you've been 8 years old, or if this just started happening today with this podcast, if you're listening, wait upon the Lord. Let it become clear. It's in His timing. Just let it incubate in His Spirit until you are ready, because you don't want to plant a church out of emotion. You want to plant a church out of a calling. And that's different. You can be excited about church planting. That's not it.
It's not God.
That's not God.
Right.
That's your emotions. You have to wait until the right moment, and you'll know. You'll know because you'll know because you'll know.
That's so good that you're saying that, because as you were talking, I see a lot of myself in you in the sense of like, you know, I want to be a lead pastor in the future, but I'm also very like, if I see it and I like it, I got to do it now. You know, I got to do it now. But what I see from this decision that you made to church plant, it all came from an encounter with God.
Absolutely.
It all came from the 21 days of fasting and prayer that you had. And I think you hit it right on the head where you say, follow God, don't follow your emotions.
Yes.
And I think you see the fruit of it, you know, where a couple months in and we feel like we've been to church for years.
That's right.
And I think it's just because it's not only your heart, which, you know, we all see and we all submit to, but it's God's heart, right? And I think that's so amazing. So going down after the 21 days of prayer and the calling that you felt from God, talk to us about the strategy behind preparing for our launch. That's
key, man. That's key, and that's something that I intentionally lived to the fullest every step. I didn't want to jump ahead, and I didn't want to lag behind. I just wanted to do every step at the fullest. And it begins with a conversation with your pastor, with your leadership.
So good.
If you don't include your leadership, already you're doomed to fail. That's it. If your pastor's not behind it, if your pastor's not backing you up, then it's not God's time. That's how it works. And so even though there was a transition of pastors at Skyline from Pastor Jim Garlow to now Pastor Jeremy McGarity, and I had been under Pastor Jeremy only a few months, I went to talk to him, and under his authority, I just opened up. I just said, look, you're my pastor. This is what I'm feeling, but I don't want to create any divisions. I don't want to jump ahead. So I'll do it the way you want it and in the time that you want it.
That's so good.
And so if you say wait 5 years, I'm going to wait 5 years. And that's part of church planning. The wait is part of church planning. And if he says you do it tomorrow, then I'll do it tomorrow. If he says, you know, great, but I can't support you, then I'll go without, let's say, financial support, not with the blessing. That I want the blessing, but the support, then that's how I'll do it. If he said, you know what, not only am I going to give my blessing, but I can support you, then that's even better. But it starts with a conversation with your pastor, with your leadership, listening to the information, really being open to the guidance that you can receive from them. Right after that, for me, the most important thing, again, was prayer. Again, because there are so many question marks. Usually when you feel called to church plant, you don't know if you're going to end up copying a church that you really like, or are you going to do something completely different or wild? Is it going to start really small, or is it going to blow up? Or so through prayer, all these anxieties that you are faced and your soul is faced with start being submitted to God. And so now it's more of like a God thing. It's completely a God thing. And all your dreams or all your wishes are just, you know, it takes second place to what God wants. So in my mind, it's like, look, God, I kind of know that I would love my church to be here, but I'm open. If you want my church to be somewhere else, then that's fine. I kind of feel that this is the style that I want, but if you want something completely different, I'll do what you want, because ultimately it's the Church of Jesus Christ. And so for me, that prayer time was essential. I reached out to people that were very close to me, people that I admired, people that I wanted on my team for this church plant. I told them about my calling, and then I said, look, I'm not looking for a yes or a no if you're coming with me. What I'm looking is for a prayer team to be with me. And so you were there. You were in our initial prayer meetings. I remember that I didn't know what to expect. I was like, well, maybe we'll just talk a little bit and answer questions, and then we'll pray for maybe 5 minutes, and that'll be it.
Complete opposite.
But man, we put some worship music on, and we were praying for about an hour nonstop, and it went by so quickly, so intensely. It was in my living room. I had just moved into my house, like no furniture, no anything, but it was the right moment again. It
felt right.
It felt right. We did several of those.
Yes.
It was through prayer confirmation. Everybody started getting their own personal confirmations from God.
Right.
And so that just started from the ground up, the church. I believe that the church plant began the first time we prayed together. Not when I received the calling, not when I talked to my pastor and he gave me the okay and everything, but it really started when a group of people came together and we started praying. By that moment, I felt a seal of approval from God and saying, this is approved. Let's move forward. This is it. And then after that, we came up with a strategy. We need a plan. There's this very famous saying that if very famous, and I can't remember it, but it goes something like, if you don't plan something, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
Right,
That's how it says it.
Yeah.
And so I'm big on planning. I'm big on calendars. We calendared pretty much all the important dates from the time we started praying all the way to our launch date. We knew we wanted to launch in September 8th.
Right.
And so everything in between, we did interest meetings at a park. We did like interest nights, but like prayer nights, revival nights at a church that they opened their doors and we could do it there, which went great. And then we did preview services, right? Just to try out on Sunday, see how everything's going, all the way to our launch in September 8th. So everything was very intentional, very planned out, and we had specific goals that we wanted to see, because if we didn't hit those goals, then it was time to back off a little bit and rework the strategy until we hit those goals.
Right.
Yeah.
So I remember those nights super clearly. I remember our preview services, our little worship prayer nights, and then our interest and preview service and all of that. Like, I remember those being super amazing. Those were like setting the tone for our launch. But September 8th was different.
Oh, man.
It was different. It was totally like, it blew my mind. The Spirit of God was there. It was better. Talk to me about better in church planning.
Look, this is what is not planned. You plan a ton of things, you visualize a ton of things, you strategize a ton of things, but ultimately you want God to show up. God is above all the plans. He is above all the expectations. He is above all that. So since day one, we put everything in God's hands. We got to work to it. We had a good crowd show up on everything that we did, really. And a couple of weeks before our launch date, we were doing preview Sundays. And we had a good attendance, but on one of the services, it was really low, and those doubts come in, and the anxiety creeps in. And I didn't know what to expect on September 8th. Now, for those that are listening and don't know anything about One Church, we ended up renting a movie theater, which was not in our initial plans, but it just started working out. And the advantage of a movie theater is that it has several sizes of theaters that you can pick from. We have the size that we were currently using it would seat between 140 to 150 people. And we started having low attendance the 2 weeks before the launch. And I didn't know whether to bump it up to the 250 seater or just stay into the 150. Now, at the beginning of the month, I had already set aside the 251. That was where I was at. I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to pack this place out and it's going to be amazing. But then a few weeks before, I'm like, oh no, I don't know if we're going to pack it. What if people don't show up? What are we going to do? And the Saturday before the Sunday, I was still debating in my mind and in my heart whether to change to the other theater or just stick with it. And I just felt convicted, and I said, look, this is not going to be a David or Daz thing or a team thing or a strategy thing. This is going to be a God thing. Right. And I'm going to give God as much room for him to work as possible. So we ended up just sticking with the plan. We arrived that day really early, set up all our gear. And I remember we were going to get started at 10 in the morning. And 9:45, there was already a crowd there.
My goodness.
Like, there were people there to the point where it got packed. Not only were all the seats completely taken, but the aisles, people had to sit on the aisles, on the staircases going up.
Right.
Like, a lot of volunteers didn't sit down for the entire service. Right. It was the worship team pretty much stayed in its place for the whole time. You know, just
we
to
broke
the side.
a lot of safety codes.
Oh yeah, we broke all the safety codes. Oh yeah, and it was just one of those amazing historic moments for our church.
Yeah.
A day that we'll always look back to and say God shows up. And that's such an amazing thing to have in your church history, especially in the launch, in the church plant phase, that from day one, you know that God shows up. You know that you're doing God's will. You know that you're doing it for him and not for your glory.
Right.
And that's where you start seeing these miracles, these responses happen. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, man.
Wow, it's been a journey.
Oh, man.
And it's only the beginning.
Yes.
And it's only the beginning. Well, bro, I want to thank you just for your heart and for being such an amazing pastor. I'm looking forward to working with you throughout the years and seeing what God does with our church. But I'm also excited to see what God does with this podcast.
Oh, man.
With this podcast.
Yes.
So I want to thank you guys for tuning in to our podcast collective. It's going to be amazing. Planters Collective.
Yeah.
I always mix it up.
Well, it's the first one.
It's the first one. So I can mix it up on the first one.
Yes.
So we want to thank you for tuning in to our Planters Collective podcast. We hope this is a blessing for you. God bless you guys.